They thought I was still in the pantry, looking for the good coffee. I was standing 6 feet away with the bag in my hand, listening to my daughter-in-law explain to a stranger exactly how she planned to spend my retirement. Once it's in the annuity, Dana said, Brian's already on the paperwork, so we can borrow against it whenever we need to. She's 70. She doesn't need that kind of money just sitting there. The stranger laughed, the soft, easy laugh of a man whose sale is going well. My son said nothing. Brian, sitting at the table his father built with his own hands, said nothing at all. I did not drop the coffee. I did not make a sound. I walked back into my own kitchen, set the bag on the counter, and smiled at the three of them like a woman who had heard nothing. What none of them knew was that I had spent 31 years as a bookkeeper for Hartwell's Hardware, and I have never, not once in my life, forgotten a number. The stranger's name was Rick. He had arrived 40 minutes earlier in a grey suit with no wrinkles and a leather folder he kept patting like a small dog. Dana had set the whole thing up 2 weeks before, the way she set up everything, by making it sound like a kindness. "Mum, you should really let Rick take a look at your accounts," she'd said on the phone. "He does this for free, just to make sure you're set up right. You worked your whole life. You deserve someone making sure nobody's taking advantage of you." That last part I would think about later, in the dark, for a long time. I'd said yes, because Brian got on the line after and asked me to. "Just hear him out, Mom, for me." Brian had a way of asking that made refusing feel like cruelty. He learned it from me, I suppose. I taught him to be gentle. I did not teach him to be this. So there we were. Rick at one end of the table, Dana beside him with her phone face down, Brian across from them with his hands folded like a boy in church, and me, pouring coffee, playing the part of the woman who needed help understanding her own money. "This is just a courtesy review, Carol," Rick said when I sat down. He slid a glossy brochure across the table, a silver-haired couple on a sailboat. "What I help families do is consolidate. Right now, your money's scattered. The IRA over here, the pension over there, a little savings doing nothing in the bank. Inefficient. What we do is bring it all into one vehicle that grows safely and pays you a guaranteed income for life." "It's a guarantee, Mom," Brian said, as if the word were a gift he was handing me. "Guaranteed by who?" I asked. Rick smiled like I'd said something charming. "By the strength of the insurance company. These are A-rated carriers. Very safe." I nodded slowly and let him keep talking. "I learned a long time ago that you find out far more by nodding than by arguing. Walt used to say that about me. He used to say, 'Your mother doesn't lose her temper. She just remembers.' He said it like a warning and a compliment at the same time. Walt, my husband, gone 3 years that spring. He'd worried about Brian. His whole life worried the boy was too soft, too easy to lead by whoever spoke loudest in the room. He used to lie awake about it. But Walt never predicted this. He worried Brian would be led. He did not know it would be the money. He did not foresee a stranger in a grey suit at our kitchen table. He worried. He did not know. There is a difference, and the difference is the part that kept me up that night. When the meeting ended, Rick left his folder on the table for me to review and said he'd call Thursday. Dana hugged me too long at the door. Brian wouldn't meet my eyes, which is how I knew he'd heard exactly what I'd heard in that pantry, and had said nothing then, too. After they drove off, I sat at the kitchen table and did not move for 41 minutes. I know it was 41 because I watched the clock. Walt hung over the stove the whole time, and watching the second hand go around was the only thing keeping my hands steady. Then I got up, took the small notebook I keep in the drawer by the phone, and wrote one line. They counted my money in front of me and thought I couldn't hear. Then I made a fresh pot, because the one I'd brewed for them had gone cold, and I started to think. The thing about being a bookkeeper for 31 years is that you stop hearing words. and start hearing the numbers underneath them. While Rick talked about safety and guarantees, I'd been doing math. A woman my age, moving $384,000 into a fixed annuity with a 10-year surrender period, that money would be locked away for a decade, and pulling out a chunk early would cost a penalty that made me wince. The commission a man like Rick earns for selling something like that, I didn't yet know to the dollar. But I knew enough to know it was the reason for the sailboat brochure. That was the surface. Bad enough. But the line that wouldn't leave me alone wasn't Rick's, it was Dana's. Brian's already on the paperwork. Already. Past tense. On what paperwork? I hadn't signed anything that day, so what had I signed before? I opened Rick's leather folder. He'd left it as a sales tactic, I'm sure, so I'd flip through the sailboats and dream. But I wasn't reading the brochures. I was reading the annuity application stapled inside, already half filled out in someone else's handwriting. My name, my birthday, my address, and on the line marked, Authorized Representative, in neat blue block letters, Brian T. Whitaker. Beside it, a checkbox, checked, that read, Power of Attorney on file. I set the folder down the way you set down something hot. Power of Attorney on file. On file where? I had never given my son power of attorney over anything. I would have remembered. I forget nothing. Except I went still, right there at the table, because a cold little thought had arrived. 8 months ago. The steak dinner. Last fall, Brian had taken me to one of those free dinner seminars at the Italian place out by the highway. Retirement planning, the invitation said. Complimentary meal. I'd thought it was sweet, my son taking me out. At the end, a young woman came around with a clipboard of informational forms, and Brian leaned over and said, Mom, sign this one too. It just lets me help with the hospital and stuff if you ever can't. Just in case. You don't want me locked out if something happens. And I had signed it. Because he was my son, and the chicken parmesan was good, and just in case is the softest trap ever built. I'd signed a durable power of attorney that night and forgotten it by dessert. They hadn't forgotten. They'd held it 8 months, waiting for the right vehicle, as Rick would say. I did not call anyone that night. I'd like to tell you I sprang into action, but that isn't true, and it isn't who I am. I sat with it. I let the whole ugly weight settle my son's block letters on a stranger's form, my daughter-in-law's voice in my pantry, the word, already. I let it hurt. Then I waited. I waited 41 hours before I called a single soul, because the first thing you want to do is almost never the smartest thing you can do, and a betrayal answered in anger is just a gift to the people who betrayed you. For 41 hours, I went to church group, watered my tomatoes, fed the cardinals Walt loved, and looked, for all the world, like a quiet old woman who had decided to take her family's good advice. Then, Monday morning, I called Eleanor Fitch. Eleanor and I had kept the books and the law, respectively, for half the small businesses in our town for 30 years. She'd drawn up my will and Walt's, and the trust that held the house. 73, and still sharp as the day she passed the bar. When I told her what I'd heard and what I'd found, she was quiet a moment. Carol, she said, come in today, not Thursday, today. In her office, she read the annuity application twice, then looked at me over her glasses. Here's where you stand. Good news. Nothing's happened yet. You haven't signed. Your money is still your money. Bad news. The power of attorney is real, and it's durable, meaning it's already in effect. These seminar forms almost never wait for incapacity. So, as of right now, legally, your son can act on your accounts. Has he? I don't know, I said. And there it was, the small fear opening into the large one. I'd come to ask about an annuity. I was learning that for 8 months, my son had held a key to every dollar I owned, and I had no idea whether he'd already turned it. Then that's the first thing we find out. Eleanor said, reaching for her phone. And the first thing we kill. We spent the afternoon on the speakerphone, her legal pad filling up. The brokerage, the bank, the county pension office. What we learned was a relief and a cold splash of water at once. He hadn't drained anything. Not yet. But he'd been there. 3 months earlier, someone using that power of attorney had called my brokerage and asked to be added for account access and transaction authority. Seeing a valid, durable POA on file, they'd granted it. My son had been quietly authorized on my retirement account since March, and the only reason it still held its full balance was that Rick's annuity hadn't been ready to receive it yet. That was the machine. Get the POA at the steak dinner, get added in spring, bring in Rick in summer, move the money into a 10-year annuity I couldn't easily touch, but they could borrow against all with my own signature, given freely at a courtesy review, so that later, if I ever asked, they could say, "But Mom, you agreed." I did not cry in Eleanor's office. I'd done my crying Friday. By Monday I was a bookkeeper again, and a bookkeeper does not weep at a bad ledger. She corrects it. "Tell me what we can do," I said, "and tell me what I'm allowed to do." Eleanor smiled for the first time that day. "Everything. It's your money. That's the part they forgot. A power of attorney is a permission you grant, and a permission you grant, you can take back. Today." So we took it back. That afternoon I signed a revocation of power of attorney, plain as a grocery list, in front of her notary. The law didn't require me to give Brian a reason or a phone call. It only required that I notify the institutions and, to keep it clean, notify him in writing. Eleanor drafted 3 letters. By 5 o'clock they were in certified envelopes, the brokerage, the bank, my son, each with a green return card that would come back to me, proving the day and hour it was received. I mailed them at the counter myself and watched the clerk stamp each one. Then I drove home, fed the cardinals, and wrote a second line. A key only works until the lock is changed. But revoking the power of attorney only closed the door they'd already walked through. It didn't move the money out of reach, and it didn't undo the thing I hadn't told even Eleanor until we were nearly done. "There's one more thing," I'd said. Years ago, when I rolled my 401k into the IRA, the form asked for a beneficiary. I was newly widowed, not thinking straight. I named Brian. Just Brian. If something happened to me before we fixed all this, does that form still stand? Eleanor set down her pen. Beneficiary designations override your will. They override your trust. Whatever that form says is who gets the account, no matter what any other document says. So yes. As it stands, if anything happened to you, every dollar in that IRA goes straight to Brian with Dana right beside him. That was the deepest hole of all, and I dug it myself, with my own grieving hand. So the next morning I drove to the brokerage in person, sat across from a young man named Marcus, who actually looked me in the eye, and did 3 things in one sitting. I removed the access granted under the revoked power of attorney. I moved the entire IRA by direct trustee-to-trustee transfer to a different, larger firm where no old authorizations existed and no Rick had ever set foot. And I changed the beneficiary not to cut my son from my life, but to name my trust, which Eleanor and I would give real terms that week. Marcus printed every confirmation. I drove home with a folder of plain papers that were, every one of them, already true. And then I waited again and let my family believe they were winning. This is the part the people who write these stories like to rush the quiet stretch where the protagonist has acted and no one knows it. I think it's the best part. Dana called more in those 2 weeks than she had in 2 years. "Mum," she said, "the first call, sweet as syrup. I just wanted to check on you. You seemed a little tired Saturday. Have you had a chance to look over Rick's folder?" "I've been looking at it," I said, which was true. "It's just such a smart move," she said. "Rick said the sooner we get it set up, the sooner it starts paying you that income. Are you leaning yes? There it was. The fishing line dropped so gently I almost admired it. I'm still thinking it through, I said. It's a lot of money to move at my age. A pause. I could hear her recalculating. Of course. Take your time. Then, lighter, casual, the hook reset. Brian and I were actually looking at a bigger place this weekend. Nothing certain, just dreaming. It's got a downstairs suite. We thought, somewhere you'd always have a room with us, when you're ready. That's thoughtful, I said, and I meant it the way she meant the room. She called twice more that week. Each time the same dance, a sweet opening, a question about Rick's folder, a mention of the house with the suite, the soft pressure of a future they'd already moved into in their heads. Each time I said I was still thinking. I wasn't lying. I think about everything. I just wasn't thinking about the thing she hoped. Rick called Thursday, oily and patient. No pressure at all, Carol, it's your money. It surely is, I said, and let him go. The signing was set for a Saturday. Rick would come back, papers ready, and Dana had, just happened, to invite her mother, Sharon, for support. Mom, since it's such a big decision. Sharon wore her opinions like jewelry and had never, in 15 years, asked me one question about my own life. I understood her presence perfectly. She was the closer there, so that if I wavered, 3 people could lean on me at my own table until I signed. They had it all arranged. Rick's commission, Brian's access, Dana's house, Sharon's pressure. The only thing they were missing was the truth about what I'd already done. That Saturday I baked. I want you to picture it, because I planned it the way Rick planned his sailboat brochure. The good cups, a lemon cake, Walt's favorite, strong coffee. When they arrived, Rick with his folder, Dana with her mother, Brian with his eyes on the floor. I welcomed every one of them like the guests they'd decided to be, and poured the coffee myself. Rick laid out his pages. The annuity application, finished now. Every line filled. We just need your signature in the marked spots, Carol, he said, fanning them out, and we'll get this money working for you. Before I sign anything, I said, I'd like to put a few of my own papers on the table. It's only fair, since everyone went to such trouble bringing theirs. I took out a folder of my own. Plain manila. No sailboats. I opened it slowly, because slowness, I have learned, is its own kind of power. This first one is a revocation of power of attorney, the one Brian had me sign at the steak dinner last fall. I revoked it 2 weeks ago. It's notarized, and the brokerage and the bank already have their copies by certified mail. So the access someone used to get added to my retirement account back in March has been removed. As of 2 weeks ago, no one has authority over my accounts but me. The room had gone very quiet. Sharon's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. This second one is from my new brokerage, the IRA. You'd like to move into your annuity, Rick. It isn't where it was. I transferred it in full, trustee to trustee, 2 weeks ago. No taxes, no penalty. It's safe, it's growing, and it can't be moved by anyone but me. Rick's smile developed a crack down the middle. And this last one is the new beneficiary designation. The account used to pay out to Brian alone. It now pays to my trust, which Eleanor and I rewrote this week, and which I'll read you the relevant part of, since we're all family here and so interested in my money. I put on my glasses and read it plainly. The trust held everything now. The house, the savings, the retirement account, by way of beneficiary. On my death, it would divide equally between my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Tyler. In shares, neither parent could touch. Paid out over years rather than all at once, so no one could borrow against it, spend it on a bigger house, or hand it to a man in a grey suit. And the successor trustee, the one who'd see it administered honestly and equally to both children, was not Brian. It was Emma. My granddaughter, 17. who balanced her own checkbook to the penny and once drove 40 minutes to return $1. She'd been overpaid at her summer job. Not because she'd inherit more, she'd inherit exactly the same as her brother, but because trust, real trust, is the only kind that should ever be on file. I closed the folder. So there's nothing left to sign today. It's all done. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Sharon set her cup down hard. Well, I think that's a very cold thing to do to your own son. Finish the sentence, Sharon, I said quietly. A cold thing to do after what? She didn't finish it. Rick was already gathering his papers, his sale dead on the table. I'll let you talk this through as a family, he said, and was gone before his coffee cooled. It was Brian who finally spoke, his voice small. Mom, the power of attorney, I only ever meant it for emergencies, I swear. I looked at my son for a long moment. The boy Walt worried about. The boy I taught to be gentle. Then you won't mind that it's gone, I said. Because there's no emergency here. Just a woman who's perfectly able to manage what she earned. They left within the hour. Dana cried in the driveway, the loud kind meant to be seen. Nobody looked back at the window where I stood. I wasn't watching them anyway. I was watching the Cardinals. That night, I wrote a third line. They brought their papers. I brought mine. Mine were already true. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. The end of the discussion was not the end of the consequences, and the people who lose these things rarely lose them quietly. The phone calls started Sunday. Then the group text cousins I hadn't spoken to since Walt's funeral, suddenly very concerned. Dana had gotten there first with her version, and it was a good one. I was confused. I was being manipulated by some lawyer. I'd cut my grieving son out of his inheritance over a misunderstanding. Wasn't it sad what loneliness does to a person? I didn't argue in the group chat. Explaining yourself to people who've already decided is just handing them more rope. I figured it would burn itself out. It didn't burn out. It got worse, because Sharon was not a woman who lost gracefully, and she'd found a tool sharper than gossip. Eleanor called me on a Tuesday. Carol, she said, and the steadiness in her voice was the kind people use right before bad news. I've been served notice of something, as your attorney of record. Sharon and Dana have filed a petition in probate court. They're asking the court to appoint a guardian and conservator for you. They're claiming you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs, that your recent decisions show, and I'm reading their words, sudden, uncharacteristic, and irrational changes consistent with diminished capacity and possible undue influence. I sat down at the kitchen table. The clock ticked over the stove. They want a judge to declare me incompetent, I said slowly, so a court can put someone in charge of my money, after I moved it where they couldn't reach it. That's exactly what they want, Eleanor said. If it works, a conservator controls your finances, and they'd petition to be that conservator. The trust, the transfer, the revocation, all of it could be reviewed and potentially unwound. It is, frankly, the most dangerous thing they've done. It's also the most desperate. This was the deepest water yet. Not my money now myself, my right to sign my own name. A stranger in a robe asked to decide whether I was still a person who could be trusted with her own life. I did not panic. I'd learned the lesson of the 41 hours. I asked one question. What does the court actually need to see? Proof, Eleanor said. A petition like this lives or dies on evidence. They have to show you lack capacity. We have to show you have it. And Carol, you have it in abundance. We're not going to argue. We're going to document. So we did what I have always done. We built the ledger. I made an appointment with Dr. Okafor, who'd been my physician for 11 years. I told her plainly what was happening. She gave me a full cognitive evaluation that afternoon. The questions, the dates, the recall, the reasoning, and wrote a letter on her letterhead, stating that, in her professional opinion, I was fully oriented, fully competent, and entirely capable of managing my own affairs. Then, I gathered everything else. The certified mail receipts with their dated signatures, the brokerage confirmations, Eleanor's notes from the day we made the calls, my notebook with its plain lines in my own hand, and a one-page summary I wrote myself because, if anyone in that courtroom wanted to see whether a woman understood her own finances, I was going to hand them a bookkeeper's statement so clear a child could follow it. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. I wore the blue dress I'd worn to Walt's funeral because it was the most serious thing I owned. Sharon and Dana sat at one table with their lawyer. I sat at the other with Eleanor. Brian sat in the back row, alone, on no one's side, which I noticed. Their lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture. An elderly widow, isolated, who'd abruptly fired the advisor her family trusted, moved hundreds of thousands of dollars, rewritten her estate, cut out her only child. Sudden, uncharacteristic. The work, surely, of a confused mind or a manipulative outside influence. Then it was Eleanor's turn, and she didn't raise her voice once. She entered Dr. Okafor's letter into the record. She entered the cognitive evaluation. She entered the certified receipts, the confirmations, the timeline. And then she asked the judge if her client might speak for herself. The judge, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses pushed up into her grey hair, said yes. I stood. I didn't make a speech. I find speeches are usually a way of avoiding the facts. I simply told the court what I'd done, and why, in order, the way I'd reconcile an account. I'd overheard my family planning to move my retirement into an annuity they could borrow against, using a power of attorney I'd signed at a free dinner without understanding it. I had revoked that power of attorney, which the law allowed me to do. I had moved my own money to a safer firm, which the law allowed me to do. I had named my trust as beneficiary and left everything, equally, to my 2 grandchildren, with my granddaughter as trustee, which the law allowed me to do. I gave the dollar figures from memory. I gave the dates from memory. I explained the difference between a power of attorney and a beneficiary designation, because I wasn't sure their lawyer fully understood it. Your Honor, I said, they've told you my decisions were sudden and irrational. They were neither. They were a Tuesday, a certified letter, and a drive to the brokerage. I have the receipts. The only thing sudden here is that the money is no longer where they expected it to be. The judge read Dr. Okafor's letter again. She looked at the receipts. She looked at me, standing there in my funeral dress, with my one-page summary in my hand, and I watched something in her face settle. She dismissed the petition from the bench. She found no evidence whatsoever of incapacity, and she said, looking over her glasses at Sharon and Dana's table, that the court took a dim view of guardianship petitions filed not to protect a vulnerable adult, but to overturn that adult's lawful and well-documented financial decisions. She did not use the word punish. She didn't need to. The arithmetic of consequences runs itself. It never needs my help. In the parking lot afterward, Sharon walked past me, without a word, her jewelry of opinions finally silent. Dana didn't look at me at all. Brian caught up to me by my car. He didn't ask for anything. That was the first sign in a long time that he was still in there somewhere. That night, I wrote a 4th line. They asked a judge whether I was still myself. I answered with receipts. Brian came to see me alone that fall, without Dana, without Sharon, without a folder. He sat at the kitchen table his father built, and for once he didn't manage me. He just talked. I knew about the account access, he said. In March, I let them add me. I told myself it was to keep an eye on things. To protect you. He pressed his palms flat on the wood. But I heard her in the pantry that day too, Mom. I heard what she said about borrowing against it. And I didn't say anything. That's the part I can't get past. And then the guardianship. I didn't sign that petition, but I didn't stop it either. I just sat there, again. I know, I said. I watched you sit there. He flinched, but he didn't argue. That was new. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, I said. An apology is a beginning. It isn't a repair. The trust stays as it is. The beneficiary stays as it is. Emma stays as trustee. None of that is punishment, and none of it comes back to the table for negotiation. It's just true now, the way it should always have been. And us? He asked. You're my son. You'll always be my son. Come for Sunday dinner any week you like. But you'll come as my son, not as someone watching the silver. He nodded. He stayed for dinner. We didn't fix everything that night, because everything isn't fixable in a night, and I've lived too long to pretend otherwise. But he came back the next Sunday and the one after, and slowly he became a man who visited his mother instead of a man who managed her. Dana didn't come for a long while, and when she finally did, she was quieter and never mentioned the bigger house again. They didn't buy it. The deposit, I heard, was the kind you don't get back. I didn't gloat about that. I didn't have to. I sent one more document before I was finished, a complaint to the state insurance commissioner about Rick, not for revenge. Because somewhere out there is another woman my age, alone at her own kitchen table, with a son who'd had too much chicken parmesan and a folder of sailboats sliding toward her. The commissioner's office wrote back 6 weeks later. They were opening a review of his firm, and they thanked me for my detailed records. Of course they were detailed. I'm a bookkeeper. The money is safe now. It does exactly what I want it to do, which is mostly nothing sitting where I can see it, growing slowly, waiting for 2 grandchildren who'll get it fairly, and over time, the way real love is given. I took a little of it, finally, and did the thing Walt and I always said we'd do and never did. I went to Ireland in the spring. I stood in the rain at the cliffs, and I was not lonely. I came home and started keeping the books, for free, 2 mornings a week at the senior centre down the road, reconciling accounts for people who, it turns out, are very easy to take advantage of, and who now have someone in their corner who reads the fine print and looks up the commission. I keep my notebook by the phone still. There's a last line in it, and I think it's the truest thing I learnt that long year. I spent 31 years protecting other people's money. It was time I protected my own. People hear a story like mine and expect the shouting, the scene at the table, the slammed door, the family torn in half with everyone bleeding. There wasn't any of that. There was a pantry, and a number I didn't forget, and a folder of plain papers that were already true. There was a key, taken back. There was a courtroom where a tired judge read a doctor's letter and looked at an old woman in a funeral dress and decided she was exactly who she'd always been. My son worried me once, and his father worried about him before that, and none of us predicted how it would come. But the betrayal that hurts the most is rarely the loud one. It's the soft one, the just in case. The form slid across the table between the main course and the coffee. The answer to it is never to be louder than they are. The answer is to be more prepared. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a manila folder, set quietly on a kitchen table, with your name on every page, and not one signature you didn't choose to give.